These boats belonged to Simon, James and John. They're fishermen, but Jesus was a carpenter. Nevertheless, Jesus gets into one of the boats. He feels the uneven rocking of tides. The salty wind brush his face. Jesus probably hardly knew a thing about boats, but he still got into one. He enters their world, their place, their comfort zone. That's how Jesus always works. Jesus never speaks from the shoreline. Jesus is never a spectator, never looking in from the outside. Jesus never shouts. He doesn't need to, because he is sitting next to us. When Jesus speaks to us, it is from inside our world, from our vantage point, feeling the rhythms that move under us, gripping the woodwork that frames our place. When Jesus speaks, we therefore hear authenticity, respect, solidarity. Jesus is always the voice of the companion and never the consultant. Jesus got into one of the boats. And he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water," not the shallow water, not the superficial water, not the skin-deep water of cosmetics and chic clothing, not at the look-at-me water of skinny latte and iPads with extras, not the ephemeral water of adrenaline and addiction. Jesus never plays, this is for you, Sam, hit and giggle 2020. He grinds out the hard yards of 5-day tests. Sam's a critic fanatic. There's a few others here too. Jesus said to Simon, "Put out into the deep water." He doesn't say, and he never says, "Look, I'm going to keep it simple, stupid. My way is bland, achievable, and relatively straightforward. I'm going to fluff the pillows and spoon feed you. Superficial, simple, and sassy." Unfortunately, some churches have fallen for that. No, Jesus always works in deep water with the deep stuff of life, the stuff buried way down, the stuff that's tough and demanding. Follow me, and by the way, that neighbour you hate, I reckon you might want to think about forgiving them. Follow me, and that parishioner you struggle with, how about having a cuppa with them? Follow me, and you can forget beachcombing, because we're going to go deep-sea fishing. It's like mining, the good stuff is always buried deep. It's like art, the good stuff takes a lifetime. It's like love, which takes guts, commitment, and perseverance. Simon answered, "Master, we've worked all night long, but we've caught nothing." Caught nothing. It's not, "Master, I've worked hard all my life and I've made a good name for myself. I've got plenty of superannuation. I'm in Fortune 500. I've been listening to your sermon on Wall Street. I loved that. Blessed are the power brokers. Blessed are the presidents. Blessed are the CEOs. Blessed are the well-regarded, the highly qualified, the oligarchs. Blessed are the good-looking, healthy and wealthy." I even love that bit where you said, "Blessed are Anglicans, for they never rock the boat, let alone get in one." Now, just adding that for fun. No, he read the Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the dirt poor, for God's kingdom is all theirs." Blessed are those who've worked all night long, but have got pretty much nothing to show for it. The context for meeting Jesus is so often a place of disappointment, of frustration, when the ego suffers humiliation and we end up feeling fed up and at our wits' end. Simon, the fisherman, with a bunch of fishermen on the boat, says to Jesus, the carpenter, the not fisherman, "If you say so, I will lay down the nets." If you say so, Jesus. All that Simon Peter has to go on here is the word of Jesus. There's no fanfare or bright lights. There's nothing in Simon's immediate experience to suggest that following Jesus' advice will work. Why trust Jesus, who's better with wood than fish? What's happening here? The way I like to think about this is like, those experiences. Have you ever had one? I've had a few when you meet someone for the very first time and you hit it off. You just find all these things in common. You find a sort of a connection. something about the way they speak or look us in the eye, their empathy. They seem to understand us, and our heart says, I can trust this person. You find yourself opening up, even though you've just met them. Well, imagine that experience on steroids. I think that's what it's like when we encounter God, sitting in our world, God saying to us, put out into the deep water. Jesus saying, follow me. That's the essence of faith. It's not about weighing up pros and cons, although some do. It's not about thinking long and hard about it, although some do. It's not even about understanding a whole lot, although some do. Because faith is not something you can sort out in advance. There's no prenuptials with faith. You can't consult an expert, take out risk insurance, watch a YouTube video and suddenly become an expert. There's no indemnity with faith. Otherwise it wouldn't be faith. It wouldn't be trust. Rather, faith is saying, okay, if you say so, I'll trust you and I'm going to give it a go. What happens? They caught so many fish that their nets were beginning to break. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both boats. Jesus meets us on our turf, speaks our language. He gets our situation. He says, follow me, trust me, go out into the deep water. And what happens? Short fish, fat fish, big fish, flying fish, jumping, flying, ducking, weaving fish. So many fish we can't count them, we can't contain them. And theologians have a special word for the extraordinary number of fish. Grace. Gift. Sheer, pure gift. We've worked our butts off, but we've come up with a big fat zero. We hear the call of Christ, and now we're up to our eyeballs in grace. A grace which cannot be contained. It doesn't just rock the boat, it almost sinks it. It is so abundant, in fact, that it has to be shared. We get sucked into a maelstrom of generosity and givingness that is Jesus, and we cannot keep it for ourselves. Luke says they called their partners to come and help them. The deep stuff of life and faith is encountered and shared with companions with whom we break bread, with whom we share our lives. Deep fishing with Christ leads to teamwork and community. And then an extraordinary, in many ways, twist in the story that is unexpected from the flow of the narrative, I believe. When Luke tells us when Simon Peter saw it, when he saw this huge abundance of grace and fish, he fell down at Jesus' knees saying, "Get away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man." For they were amazed, not at the gravity of their sins, they weren't amazed at their shortcomings, their guilt, their inability to be loving and kind like Jesus. No, they were amazed at the catch of fish they had taken. What amazes Simon is the enormity of the grace, not the enormity of his sin. It is always grace that transforms us, not sin. Grace and not guilt. Encountering grace, not wallowing in guilt, is what brings transformation. Whenever you hear a church preaching over and over again about sin and guilt and falling short of the glory of God, etc., etc., I grew up on that for 20 years. It was never transformative, I can assure you. What is transformative is encountering the outrageous, the outlandish, the undeserved generosity and hospitality and overwhelming grace and gift of God. It's when we see that we can see our own stinginess, our own preoccupation with self, our egocentricity. And that's why grace brings transformation, not guilt. You know, in those stories they share where people have these extraordinary encounters in truth and reconciliation commissions in South Africa or in East Timor or in Rwanda, you read there and see what brings transformation. It's when the person who had suffered terribly reaches out with kindness towards the person involved in the oppression or the persecution. It doesn't always happen that way, and you don't have to do it that way, of course. I'm just saying as an example. Trying to see that we intuit, we understand this, and we know it happens that way. When somebody says, you are forgiven, I forgive you, I let go of that. That can be transformative. As I said, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying you have to forgive oppressors or persecutors. But just sometimes in those moments of unexpected grace and forgiveness, we also get a clue of that transformative power of grace. Jesus says to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on you'll be catching people. Doesn't even talk about his sin. He just calls him out to a new life, calls him to a vocation, calls him forward. Don't be afraid. When they brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed Jesus. This is what happens when we're swamped with grace. Everything is left behind, meaning everything changes perspective. The priorities change. Something that we held on to dearly, we can let go of. When we enter the deep waters of God's goodness and generosity, some things suddenly seem very small and insignificant. Things that we may have clutched onto for dear life, we find ourselves letting go of with barely a thought. This is what can happen when we head out into the deep waters of faith with God. For Jesus comes to each of us and says in one way or another, put out into the deep water. Do not be afraid. You may not know where you're going, where it will lead, what grace will look like in your context, but there is something about his call, his sitting alongside us, the closeness, the thoughtfulness, the cut through all the crapness of the voice of Christ that stirs us to action. Put it out into the deep water. Don't let your fears incapacitate you. Venture out into the vast and fathomless ocean of God's life and love. For in that place, in the deep waters of a life lived with this God, it is there that we dare to hope we will find our true home. Amen.